Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. I'm Dr. Ben. I'm a naturopathic doctor specializing in whole food, plant based nutrition, and mind body medicine, empowering you to heal yourself. And today on the podcast, I'm excited to talk about food and really address a very common question that comes up regularly with clients, with random folks, people on the street, people who are curious, because there's a lot of ways to eat plants. And that is the question of raw food versus cooked food. And before we get into today's conversation, I want to do a little commercial for our advertiser advertisement today. This episode is brought to you by Alter Health, and Alter Health is, of course, your place for nutritional education and inspiration in whole food, plant-based living, as well as mind body medicine. So our offerings that are sponsoring today's episode, and this is, kind of a joke, but the fact is that this is how we keep these episodes going. So our meal guide membership is a great way to receive healthy inspiration every week of the year. You can sign up for the whole year and actually receive 2 months free. It's just $11 a month, but you can sign up for the whole year for just $110, I believe it is. So you can get healthy, whole food, plant-based, balanced meals, some raw food, some cooked food delivered to your inbox, not like the food itself, but the recipes, and you do the work to prepare it and eat it and feel great. So that is just $11 a month. And then another great opportunity, which is very time sensitive, is the cleanse. And the Alter Health Cleanse starts this weekend. Our first cleanse meeting is on Friday. The cleansing itself starts on Sunday. This is just a really great way to dive in headfirst into whole food, plant-based living and clean things up and actually move towards more and more raw food into the diet for just a short period of time. We're going to be talking about how and why it's might be helpful to eat more raw food. So anyways, that cleanse is a great way to start your year and refine and reboot yourself to your healthy habits. So all that kind of stuff you can find at www.alter.health. Now on to the show. So let's talk about raw food and cooked food. And I just want to preface this conversation with sharing my personal experience. I actually came into whole food plant-based nutrition through a quote unquote raw vegan sort of diet lifestyle. I was mostly raw for, people like to kind of quantify their percentage raw. I would say I was probably 80% raw or so for the better part of a year. Nothing crazy. And I felt great. I felt really great, and I kind of slowly got there. I just kind of started to take things out of my diet. I actually, one of the more inspiring figures in my life was David Avocado Wolf. This was like 12 years ago or so. And so I learned about raw foodism and took it pretty seriously and felt great. And then maybe some of you have heard the story. I started naturopathic medical school and was very much whole food, plant-based, not anymore raw. But then, moved into a home with chickens in the backyard and kind of the Portland, Oregon lifestyle, the farm to table sort of thing. And then the naturopathic, uh, the naturopathic kind of vibe is more of like the paleo orientation versus like the plant-based vegan orientation. So anyways, I kind of slowly started to eat more animal products for a couple of years and also felt great. But then I didn't feel that great and I cleaned things up again. And you guys already know that my way of eating now is what I refer to as very much a balanced whole food plant-based lifestyle. I don't really prioritize raw food or cooked food. I think it's important to blend the both. So I have a lot of experience in this world personally and also professionally. And I want to talk about the benefits of raw food and the benefits of cooked food and how we can healthfully balance our intake of raw food and cooked food and when we might want to prioritize eating more raw food, like when in the year, when in our life cycles, when in our like health, and also how to do that in a way that's going to be sustainable and not going to lead us to depletion. So Right off the bat, let's talk about raw food and kind of what raw food has going for it. And people talk about raw food as being a source of, for sure, like the hydration, raw food and the fruits and vegetables. Let's just kind of cut to the chase here. Like when we're eating raw food, it's mainly fruits and vegetables, right? You can't really eat the raw starchy vegetables that well. I've actually sliced up a sweet potato and like eaten a raw sweet potato, but we don't really get full access to the nutrition in starchy vegetables. We certainly don't get full access to the nutrition in legumes. It's actually can be kind of harmful to eat raw legumes, with the exception of some sprouted legumes like mung beans and whatnot. And then whole grains as well as big category of food. It's hard to eat whole grains raw. Again, with some exceptions, buckwheat, raw oats, these sort of things. But in general, when we're talking about raw food, we're talking about fruits and vegetables. And a lot of raw food people also eat a lot of nuts and seeds and avocado. A lot of raw food people even prioritize oils and the processed things that, of course, we've got other episodes of the podcast talking about why we might want to avoid oils for our health. But in general, when we're talking about eating like a quote unquote balanced nourishing raw food diet, it's really all about the hydration that this food provides you. The hydration, and then, of course, the vitamin and mineral nutrient density. And people also talk about raw foods as having more enzymes in them. There's, of course, the magic number of, I think it's 118 degrees Fahrenheit, and people want to keep their food below 118 degrees Fahrenheit, so they might dehydrate food at a very low temperature to preserve the enzymes that are locked into raw whole plant foods. And those enzymes, of course, are helpful in healthy digestion of the raw fruits and vegetables. And the enzymes and some other nutrients, for that matter, are degraded with heat. So when we cook the raw foods and raise the temperature of our food, we break down some of the nutrients and, for sure, most of the enzymes. So hopefully that kind of paints the picture of what raw food has going for it. Again, just to recap: the hydration, the nutrient density, the enzyme content, and I guess more of an energetic standpoint, like the life, the vibration. I think when you hold a fresh mango in your hand and kind of like start to enjoy that mango, it feels very different than when you hold a sweet potato that's been cooked or baked or steamed or whatever. And it's equally nourishing, you could say, but it feels very different. It kind of has a different effect in the body. I guess you could kind of look at that from more of like an Ayurvedic perspective of, more higher. I don't know. I'm not really good at the language to describe it, but hopefully you get what I'm talking about. The raw food benefits are vast, and we definitely want to be eating raw food. And for sure, the cooked food benefits also are there as well. So let's talk about cooked food for a little bit. And from my understanding, again, I'm not like a historical anthropologist or anything like that, but my understanding is that using fire and cooking material to cook food is really what allowed humanity to flourish and thrive and kind of evolve. And from my understanding, like grow a brain size, like grow significant brain, and whatnot. And that's because when we cook food, we can get access to the starch and the more calorically dense parts of the food, the fuel that is going to energize us a little bit more so. So I'm talking about the potatoes and the tubers and the starchy vegetables and this winter squash and these things like that, and also the legumes and the intact whole grains. Like in order to really access the nourishment and fuel that these foods have to offer, we've got to cook them. So of course, when we do cook them, yeah, maybe we degrade some of the vitamins, we degrade some of the enzymes and nutrients to some extent. But for sure, we gain access to a lot of the essential fuel that, let's face it, fuel is like the body's highest priority. If we're starving, if we're stranded, if we're famished, hopefully we're going for like a big pot of like brown rice and beans and spinach versus like a couple mangoes and bananas and like a handful of kale or something like that. The more calorically dense food is going to be cooked for the most part, right? For the most part. So that's an important thing to know. And the other thing about cooked food, like I said, some of the nutrients get degraded when we cook the food, but there are other nutrients that actually become more bioavailable when we steam vegetables and saute vegetables. So I think it in the end, like nutrient quality is kind of a wash. So like the nutrients in raw vegetables versus cooked vegetables, you don't really have to think about, oh, I better eat a lot of raw vegetables in order to get a lot more nutrients. Now the water content and the hydration for sure, like that's really important. If you've ever, had you know, chomped on a few celery sticks, it's like, hydrating, no doubt. And a lot of people say, oh, yeah, celery, it's what, like 2 calories per celery stick. And some people make the joke that you burn more calories or energy eating a stick of celery than you do getting the nutrients from that stick of celery. But the fact is that the water in that celery, like 98, 99% water, whatever it is some of the best water on the planet. It's been filtered by the earth, filtered by the plant, and then kind of locks in all of this life, locks in all of these nutrients and vitamins and minerals. And then it's kind of like the best sports drink that we could ever get is just like eating raw fruits and vegetables. And then of course people can juice the raw fruits and vegetables, get even greater access to those vitamins and minerals. So that's something to know. Now, let's talk about the risks associated with eating like a high raw diet, a raw food predominant diet. And it all really boils down to one thing, and that is malnourishment. And that's because eating a raw vegan diet is very difficult. It actually is it's very difficult to eat enough food to get enough nourishment when just focusing on the raw fruits and vegetables. Again, that's because the cooked foods contain more caloric density. And that's why maybe it can be beneficial to weave some of that in. So the main risk is just not getting enough food, not getting enough fuel when focusing on raw vegan nutrition. That being said, a lot of people do get enough fuel, do get enough food. I always say, like, if I lived in Hawaii, if I lived in Costa Rica, if I lived in the tropics, I would probably be predominantly raw because all of that kind of stuff is ideally like in the paradise growing right out the door, right? So, we've got greater access to that sort of food depending on where we live. For someone living at higher latitudes to try and be raw vegan, I think it's going to be really difficult, not only due to the access of the fuel, but also I think an important consideration is also just the body's adaptation to different weathers and different climates and whatnot. A lot of people just simply thrive better on more raw food when they're closer to the equator. It's really as simple as that. So that being said, like I said, like the main risk is just malnourishment. And you'll hear stories. I mean, every once in a while there'll be a story of some family raising a kiddo raw vegan, and the kiddo got really sick. Or I think there's even been cases of kids, little kids dying on a raw vegan diet because they're not getting enough food. And yeah, I guess that's no one else's fault but the parents for not really balancing that nutrition properly. Now, that being said, of course, it is possible, just to reiterate it and emphasize the fact that it is possible and very healthy to eat raw foods when we're doing it properly. That is, when we're getting enough. And again, it does take a lot of food, a lot of raw food specifically to meet our energy and nutritional needs. So we just have to, it's kind of like a full-time job being a raw foodist, unless you're living on a fruit farm where, you're just have full access to all that kind of stuff all the time. So Next, I want to talk about I talked about the risks of raw eating predominantly raw food. Now, the risks of eating predominantly cooked food are also kind of nutrient depletion, because if we're just eating cooked food, then maybe we don't have access to all the living vitamins and minerals that might be more bioavailable from the raw, fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, I said that some of those vitamins and minerals do become more bioavailable and bioactivated when we cook them, but generally speaking, like we do like the raw fresh food is going to be more nourishing. But assuming that we have some amount of raw fresh fruits and vegetables, produce in our diet every single day, we don't really have to worry about it. Now, I want to talk about special considerations for people depending on health conditions that they might be experiencing. And this, of course, kind of leads itself into the idea of like, what is our ultra health cleanse, right? The fact that raw fruits and vegetables are so much more hydrating and generally more nutrient dense means that they more effectively promote detoxification in the body. When we're getting enough of them, enough of these raw fruits and vegetables, they promote cellular regeneration and repair and kind of deep healing in that way. Now, again, I think I've said it like 9 or 10 times. We got to get enough. And if we're doing a raw vegan diet for any period of time, we've got to stay on top of it. And I want to take just a quick little tangent before I go too far. I want to share, where's my thing? Oh, I want to share a study. This caught my attention a couple years ago. And you see here the title of the study. For those just listening, I'll read it to you. The title of the study is Consequences of a Long-Term Raw Food Diet on Body Weight and Menstruation, Results of a Questionnaire Survey. So you probably can't read this, but I'm going to zoom in a little bit and just read the conclusion here of this. I'm not going to obviously read this whole paper, but the conclusion is that the consumption of a raw food diet is associated with a high loss of body weight, since many raw food dieters exhibited underweight and since many raw food dieters exhibited underweight and amenorrhea or loss of their menses, a very strict raw food diet cannot be recommended on a long-term basis. And the reason for this, again, this particular study doesn't really dive into the weeds too deeply to investigate like why is eating a raw food diet leading to amenorrhea or the loss of menses, which for those of you who do have periods, the females listening, that's a significant thing. Having regular menses is obviously a sign of health, and not having regular menses is a sign of imbalance. So it is an important health marker, regular healthy menstrual cycles. So this is, of course, pointing to the fact that low body weight is what leads to amenorrhea. Now, what leads to low body weight? Malnourishment. So back to what I said before, the raw vegan lifestyle can be done appropriately in a balanced sort of way where we're getting enough food, but it's very difficult. It's so difficult that this study here even comes to the conclusion that it's not recommended. Now, I don't know if the participants in the study where where they were geographically, and obviously exactly what they were eating, but I could make the conclusion myself that the participants of this study were not eating enough, and that's what led to the depletion of body weight and the lack of regular menstrual cycles, which again is an important thing to consider when choosing and balancing our diet. So of course, it goes without saying that we can lose our menses and become, not me, but you or those with a menses can lose it and become amenorrheic while eating a whole food plant-based diet that isn't just raw. Again, if you're not eating enough, that's not very common, but a common enough side effect from being malnourished is losing menses. So something to consider. So that's kind of the main factor or main risk factor of eating strictly raw. The main risk factor for eating strictly cooked is just kind of general depletion of the healing nutrients that our body needs to optimize metabolism and detoxify. And I don't know about you, but whenever it's not very often, but whenever I start the day without a smoothie, without kind of a really hydrating morning with like lots of water, maybe a juice and smoothie and that sort of thing, I kind of feel blah. I kind of feel like my body is lacking energy. So starting the day with a flood of hydration from fruits and vegetables, because again, fruits and vegetables are giving us lots of water, but also like the optimal best water available on the planet. Um, Now, a lot of people, when talking about balancing raw food and cooked food, they get really nuanced and micromanage things like, okay, you got to steam your kale because you can't have the oxalates in the kale. I don't, that's not a real thing. Actually, kale is a low oxalate vegetable. But in any case, like people come up with all these ideas and considerations, like and pairings, right? Like, oh, you should eat your spinach with some citrus because spinach is rich in iron and citrus is rich in vitamin C. And you need the vitamin C to make the iron more bioavailable. And if you don't have the vitamin C rich food with the iron rich foods, then you're not going to get your iron, blah, 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 blah. But the cool thing is that all whole plant foods actually have all pretty much all nutrients. And to that, I would add not only do they have all nutrients, but they have all nutrients in a perfectly balanced, amazingly complex, synergistic way that allows us to access and balance our physiology in relationship to them. So the cool thing is we don't need to overthink this. And one of my all-time favorite books that kind of unpacks this topic and really debunks reductionistic nutritional science is the book Whole by T. Colin Campbell. It's like a great read, and it's just not too heady, not too scientific, just enough science, but it debunks all that reductionistic science to just really allow us to rest and relax and trust the fact that when we eat whole plant foods, nature knows how to micromanage and balance our nutrition for us. And we just have to eat enough of them. And maybe, yeah, with a little bit of consideration, like we shouldn't just be eating carrot sticks and celery and hummus like every single day for months on end. But with any sort of diversity of our nutritional habits and food choices, we will be perfectly set up for success and balance in our whole food plant based lifestyle. So yes, lastly, I want to talk about kind of relating to the cooked food and the raw food and how to weave that in. Like, okay, should I just eat a bowl of steamed rice and a handful of like raw spinach on there and like and raw carrot sticks and raw this or that and a raw banana chopped onto my rice? Like, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of ways to combine foods, right? But it is worth noting that there is a little bit of science and strategy to optimal food combining when talking about raw food and cooked food. And it really is pertaining mostly, and this information is mostly for people who have maybe a more sensitive digestive system, tend to have more gas and bloating and like feel like, oh, I don't know if I can do all this whole plant foods. I just, feel bloated all the time. And just as a reminder, we've talked about this a number of times before, but gas and bloating is not a pathologic thing. It's not a bad thing to feel bloated. Of course, chronic ongoing gas and bloating, we want to investigate that. But gas and bloating is just a normal, natural consequence to the shift and adaptation of our microbiome. So as we kind of move into a higher fiber, plant-based diet, we're going to have gas and bloating. Now, of course, that gas and bloating is going to plateau and go back to normalcy, and we're not going to be like scaring our friends and family and having and people aren't going to have to leave the room when they're around us. Like, and to that effect, the gas that we might have generally is not going to be of the stinky variety. The stinky variety might come and go, but if stinky gas persists, reach out. There might be some sort of imbalance that can be worked out. But the fact is that gas and bloating is not pathologic. And as we stick with a higher fiber diet, we normalize and diversify our microbiome. But that being said, it might be helpful to think about combining raw food and cooked food and with a little bit of forethought and strategy. And that's primarily due to the fact that raw food is generally digested more quickly than cooked food. And therefore, raw food does best be eaten kind of on its own, and also maybe like before cooked food, and specifically fruits. Maybe some of you have heard this before. Fruits, we just think about eating like an apple or a banana or an orange or something like that. That apple or that piece of fruit is going to be broken down and move through the stomach, the upper digestive system, in a matter of like 20 minutes or so, maybe even less. For sure, even like watermelon and melons and grapes and some of these even higher water content fruits are digested even more quickly. So if we are kind of eating like a handful of grapes and watermelon and also have like this baked potato and this bowl of black beans, and we're just kind of like hodgepodging things together, which I have to say, like, that tends to happen for a lot of people at like a potluck or something like that. And that's not my favorite way. Like, I'm not a huge fan of potlucks for that reason. I try to, whenever I'm at a potluck, I'm like, all right, how can I strategize this to be most effective and balanced for my microbes in my gut? But in any event, the raw foods and specifically the fruits are digested most quickly. So a lot of people prefer to eat those on their own, even as like a quote unquote mono meal, just a meal of mangoes, just a meal of oranges, just a meal of melon or something like that. And then you can have that mono meal. And then 30 minutes later, 45 minutes later, or whatever, you can have some other, like another meal, like, whatever else comes next, that's digested at a slower rate. Now, salads, leafy greens, and raw vegetables and things like that, those are also digested pretty quickly. And for that reason, we like to have like a starter salad before dinner. Leafy greens and chopped cabbage and carrots and celery and tomatoes, whatever else. And that, putting that in the stomach before dinner, just like as the first course, you don't have to wait any extended period of time, but that kind of like moves through the stomach before the rest of the food. In my experience, if I, and there's a lot of personalization and individualized nuance to this based on each individual microbiome. But in my experience, if I eat like a quote unquote heavier meal, potatoes, legumes, whole grains, and those kind of starchy foods that are still really nourishing, but they just simply, due to various factors, take longer to digest and move through the stomach, maybe on the like an hour to two. If I eat that kind of food before a salad, or especially before some fruit, I will invariably experience some gas and bloating. Again, it's not a pathologic thing. It's not going to like set my health goals back or anything like that. But it can be uncomfortable and potentially stinky for those around. So to avoid that and to really optimize digestion, these kind of nuanced food combining considerations can be helpful. So in terms of back to that idea of balancing and combining raw and cooked food, there's this whole idea that I learned from Dr. Susanna, who learned from, was it Freely the Banana Girl or something like that? The raw till four. That is a popular idea, that you're essentially eating raw food up until dinner time. And that's one way to think about it. It's kind of front loading your day with all the hydrating fruits and vegetables. And that's really a great practice. And then of course, after four, assuming that's like when dinner time is, and dinner time can be like a, heavier meal that may take a little bit longer to digest. But we've got all the other food kind of going through us before then. So that's one way of thinking about it. Of course, in the winter time, myself, like depending on the weather, I wouldn't say that my lunches are usually raw, this time of year. In the summertime, and when, again, depending on where I'm at, depending on climate, depending on my vibe, I might do more raw food up until dinner time. But again, that the whole idea is just that those food combining considerations. And the raw till four thing is also kind of emphasizing the fact that putting the raw, healing, nutrient dense, hydrating fruits and vegetables in our body in the beginning and middle of the day is really emphasizing all of the detoxification pathways that actually do take place when we're sleeping and then into morning. So we do like to have a hydrating, nutrient dense, raw sort of breakfast to kind of keep the liver doing what it's designed to do early in the day. So, some things to think about. Of course, I think like the take home message here that seems to come up all the time for the work that we do is that this is an individualized journey. There's so many ways to balance a whole food plant-based lifestyle, and when it comes down to it, it's really a matter of listening, like figuring out how to tune into our body, tune into the messages that we're receiving from our body, that we're receiving from our higher self, our intuition, whatever you want to call it, and really listening to that. And not, that being said, of course, we provide meal plans and recipes, and just another little commercial for that. The meal plan is really a source of inspiration that helps, keep people consistent in their whole food plant-based lifestyle. But we're all unique individuals, and we all have unique preferences and unique microbiomes, and our unique microbiome has unique influences on our epigenetic expression and experience of health and balance and biochemistry. So we need to respect that. And, just because Joe Bob is eating like 95 bananas a day and like, doing the raw vegan lifestyle and is telling you that you should be raw vegan too, and you got to do this in order to experience that, that not is not necessarily true. So hopefully this helps you to understand this more nuanced topic in whole food plant-based nutrition with a little bit more scrutiny, and hopefully like also a little bit of scientific understanding as well. And again, appreciate you for tuning into this podcast episode. Feel free to like, subscribe, whatever, share with a friend who might be kind of sucked into some sort of nutritional dogma. And also, just a reminder, if you do want to join the cleanse, if you are looking for a deep reset, and this cleanse does kind of capitalize and focus on some of the things that we've talked about today, really moving us into a deeply hydrating and nourishing and detoxifying, mostly raw, whole food, plant-based lifestyle for a period of time, because that has its benefits. And also then moving back into something that's more sustainable, because let's face it, sustainability is key. So hopefully this resonates. If you've got any feedback or questions, or if you want to share how you're balancing your whole food plant-based diet in terms of raw versus cooked food, feel free to drop that in the comments. And thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Peace.